The roar of the approaching ship sent a cold chill down Daniel's spine. He had no idea how they had found him so fast, but he knew one thing: he needed to move. The armor felt strange on his body, like a second skin, yet impossibly light. He didn't have time to think about it. Whoever was coming wouldn't be friendly. The ship descended, kicking up dust and debris as it hovered over the ruins. Daniel ducked behind a broken pillar, trying to steady his breathing. His mind raced. He had no weapons, no plan, and no idea what the armor could actually do. But he knew one thing: if these people wanted the armor, they would kill him for it. A metallic clang echoed through the air as the ship's landing ramp extended. Shadows moved against the bright lights. Then they stepped out, tall, armored figures, their movements sharp and disciplined. He recognized them immediately. The Vericon Hunters, a ruthless mercenary force that worked for the highest bidder. If they were here, that meant someone powerful had already put a price on his head. Daniel clenched his fists, trying to think. Running was pointless. The ship would track him, and the hunters would be faster. Hiding wouldn't work either. They had scanners, and the ruins wouldn't protect him for long. He had only one choice: fight. He had never been a soldier, never been trained in combat. But something deep inside him, something connected to the armor, told him he could. It was a strange feeling, like an instinct he hadn't known was there. The hunters spread out, scanning the area with glowing visors. One of them stopped, turning toward the pillar Daniel was hiding behind. "Life sign detected," the hunter growled. "We've got him." Before Daniel could react, the hunter raised a sleek, high-tech rifle. Time seemed to slow. The barrel flared with blue light as it prepared to fire. And then the armor moved. Daniel didn't tell it to. He barely had time to think. His body twisted on its own, dodging the shot by inches. The ground exploded where he had been standing a moment ago. Before he even knew what he was doing, his legs pushed off the ground, sending him flying forward with unnatural speed. The hunter barely had time to react before Daniel slammed into him. The force of the impact sent the alien crashing backward, his rifle flying from his hands. Daniel hit the ground and rolled, landing on his feet with perfect balance. The armor wasn't just protecting him, it was guiding him. The other hunters shouted, raising their weapons. Daniel turned just as the first bullet streaked toward him. But instead of pain, the armor absorbed the hit. The energy rippled across the surface, dispersing harmlessly. The hunters hesitated, shocked. "He's adapting." One of them took a step back. "That's not possible." Daniel didn't wait for them to recover. He sprinted toward the nearest hunter, moving faster than any human should be able to. The alien tried to react, but it was too late. Daniel's fist connected with his chest. Only, it wasn't just a punch. The force sent the hunter flying through the air, smashing into a ruined wall with a sickening crunch. The others hesitated. These were trained killers, but they had never seen anything like this, a human wearing the armor. Fighting like this, it was impossible. One of them barked orders in their alien tongue, and the remaining hunters repositioned, trying to surround him. Daniel felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He knew what was coming. They would try to overwhelm him with numbers, force him into a position he couldn't escape. But the armor wasn't afraid. Something in his vision shifted. A strange overlay appeared in front of his eyes, mapping out the battlefield. It showed him their movements before they even made them. He could see their weaknesses, the gaps in their formation. It was like the armor was feeding him knowledge, instincts that weren't his own. The first hunter lunged forward, a curved blade flashing in the dim light. Daniel sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing the alien's wrist and twisting. Bones snapped, and the hunter screamed. Daniel finished him with a sharp kick, sending him sprawling. Another came at him from the side, swinging a heavy baton crackling with electricity. The armor reacted before Daniel could think, his arm coming up to block the strike. The baton hit the metal, but instead of hurting him, the energy dissipated harmlessly. Daniel countered with a brutal elbow to the alien's face, knocking him unconscious. The last two hunters hesitated. They had seen enough. One of them reached for his communicator, probably to call for backup. Daniel knew he couldn't let that happen. He moved before they could react, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. His fist connected with the first one's stomach, folding him in half. The last one turned to run, but Daniel grabbed him by the collar and threw him across the courtyard like he weighed nothing. The alien hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Silence. Daniel stood in the center of the battlefield, breathing heavily. Around him, the bodies of the fallen hunters lay still. He had won. Alone. He looked down at his hands, still covered in the living metal. This wasn't just armor. It was something more. It had chosen him, made him faster, stronger. It had turned him into something the galaxy had never seen before. And now, the galaxy would come for him. A deep hum filled the air. Daniel turned sharply. The ship's engines roared to life. The hunters might have lost, but their ship was still active. He had no doubt that it was already sending out a distress signal. Within hours, the entire sector would know what had happened here. Panic surged in his chest. He couldn't stay. More would come. Stronger forces. If the hunters were here, then it meant the ruling factions had already found out about the armor. He was no longer just a scavenger. He was a target. Daniel took one last look at the battlefield before turning toward the ship. If he was going to survive, he needed to get off this planet. Fast. As he moved, the armor pulsed with a faint, almost living energy. It had chosen him for a reason. And soon, the entire galaxy would learn why. The ship's engines hummed softly beneath Daniel's feet as he stood on the bridge, gripping the controls with shaking hands. The Vericon hunters were down, but their distress signal was already out there, racing across the stars. He didn't have much time. Every bounty hunter, warlord, and galactic enforcer in the sector would be coming for him now. The ship's control system was built for alien hands, its interface a mess of glowing symbols and shifting patterns, but somehow Daniel understood it. The armor whispered in the back of his mind, guiding his fingers as they danced across the controls. A map flickered into view, displaying his position on the surface of HFY-7. Several red markers blinked on the edges of the screen. Ships inbound. Daniel gritted his teeth and pushed the throttle forward. The ship jolted as it lifted off, engines roaring against the weight of gravity. The ruins below shrank rapidly, swallowed by the thick clouds above. For a moment, relief washed over him. He had made it off the ground. He had a chance. Then the alarm blared. The radar lit up with flashing red warnings. Enemy ships were closing in. Fast. A massive battleship loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette blocking the stars. Smaller attack craft swarmed around it, moving into formation. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to destroy him. Daniel's breath came fast and shallow. He had never flown in a battle before. He was a scavenger, not a fighter pilot. But the armor was different. It pulsed against his skin, feeding him knowledge, instincts that weren't his own. His hands moved before he could second-guess himself, flipping switches, adjusting the thrusters. The ship responded like it was an extension of his body. The first enemy fighters broke formation, diving straight at him. Plasma bolts streaked through the darkness, slamming against the shields of his stolen ship. Sparks flew from the console as warning lights flashed. He had no idea how long the shields would hold. A cold, steady voice echoed in his mind. It wasn't human. Evasive maneuvers engage. The ship banked hard to the right, narrowly avoiding another blast. Daniel gasped, gripping the controls as the G-force pressed him into his seat. He wasn't doing this. The armor was. More shots rained down, lighting up the void with explosions. His ship weaved through the chaos, dodging attacks with impossible precision. The enemy fighters adjusted, trying to box him in. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He couldn't just run forever. He needed to fight back. His fingers flew across the weapons panel. The ship's targeting system locked onto the nearest enemy. Daniel hesitated for a split second, then fired. A streak of red energy tore through space. The enemy fighter exploded in a brilliant burst of fire and metal. The shockwave rocked his ship, but he barely noticed. A second fighter moved to avenge its fallen ally, launching a barrage of missiles. Daniel had no time to think. The armor moved again, forcing his hands to jerk the controls. His ship spun, diving between two incoming fighters. The missiles missed, colliding with one of their own ships instead. Another explosion filled the screen. The battle was pure chaos. Daniel barely knew what he was doing, but somehow he was surviving. The armor wasn't just guiding him, it was teaching him. He was flying like he had trained for years, maneuvering with the instincts of a veteran pilot. The battleship in the distance grew larger. It was moving closer, blocking his escape route. If he didn't do something soon, they would crush him. Warning: capital ship charging primary cannon. Daniel's stomach dropped. The battleship's main weapon hummed with deadly energy, a massive cannon glowing with blue light. If it fired, he wouldn't have a chance. A desperate idea formed in his mind. It was insane, but it was the only shot he had. He gritted his teeth and slammed the throttle to full power. The ship lurched forward, speeding straight toward the enemy battleship. The fighters behind him hesitated, caught off guard by the suicidal maneuver. Daniel didn't slow down. The battleship loomed ahead, its cannon reaching critical charge. The ship's targeting system screamed warnings at him. At the last possible second, he yanked the controls hard to the left. His ship rolled, scraping along the battleship's hull. The sudden move threw off the enemy's targeting system. The cannon fired, missing him by inches. The massive energy blast streaked into space, hitting one of their own fighters instead. The battleship's shields flickered from the strain. That was his opening. Daniel slammed the weapon controls again. A barrage of plasma fire erupted from his ship's cannons, hammering the weakened shields. The battleship groaned under the assault. Then, with one final shot, something critical ruptured. A massive explosion tore through the enemy's hull. Fire and debris erupted into space as the ship's systems failed. The once mighty warship listed to one side, powerless. Silence filled the comms. The remaining fighters hesitated, no longer sure if they should continue. Daniel took his chance. He punched the warp drive. The ship groaned as space twisted around him. The enemy fighters vanished into the distance, their signals fading from his radar. Within seconds, the star-filled void blurred, and then he was gone. The moment the ship stabilized, Daniel slumped back in his seat, his breath ragged. He had done it. He had escaped. But he knew this was only the beginning. The armor had chosen him. The galaxy wouldn't just let him go. More enemies would come. More battles would follow. He had something they wanted, something that could change everything. And he had a feeling that the armor had only just begun to show him what it could do. The ship drifted in the silence of deep space, the hum of its damaged engines the only sound in the cockpit. Daniel sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers still gripping the controls as if he were afraid to let go. His heart was still pounding, his body still tense from the battle. He had escaped, but barely. The armor pulsed against his skin, alive in a way that no technology should be. He had felt it guiding him, moving him, teaching him. It was as if the armor had memories, instincts that weren't his own. He should have been terrified, but instead, he felt something else, something dangerous. He felt powerful. Shaking off the thought, Daniel forced himself to focus. He needed a plan. The armor had put a target on his back. The Vericon hunters had been the first, but they wouldn't be the last. Someone, somewhere, had sent them after him, and now the entire galaxy would know what he had. He opened the ship's star map. The screen flickered, still damaged from the battle, but it was functional enough. He needed a safe harbor, somewhere to repair the ship and figure out his next move. He scrolled through the options. Most of the major stations were out of the question. Too many eyes, too many bounty hunters. Then he saw it. Draven's Hollow. A lawless, hidden outpost on the edge of civilized space. No government, no security, just smugglers, traders and criminals who minded their own business. If he could make it there, he could disappear, at least for a while. He locked in the coordinates and engaged the autopilot. The ship groaned, but the engines obeyed, pushing him toward his destination. For the first time in hours, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with questions. Why had the armor chosen him? Why had it rejected every other species, but bonded with a human? And more importantly, what did it want? He looked down at his hands, still covered in the strange, living metal. He flexed his fingers, watching as the armor shifted with his movements. It felt like it belonged there, like it had always been a part of him. He had never felt stronger, never moved faster, never thought this clearly. But there was something else, something deeper, a whisper in the back of his mind, faint but persistent. You are not alone. Daniel stiffened. His eyes darted around the cockpit. The voice hadn't come from the ship's systems. It hadn't come from the comms. It had come from inside his own head. He swallowed hard. Who's there? Silence. Then, just as he was about to shake it off as exhaustion, the whisper came again. You are the first. Daniel's hands clenched. The first what? The armor didn't answer. A cold chill ran down his spine. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know the answer. Hours later, the ship dropped out of warp, and Draven's Hollow came into view. It wasn't much to look at. A cluster of mismatched space stations welded together, floating in the darkness like a patchwork fortress. The place was a haven for the desperate and the dangerous, a last refuge for those who had nowhere else to go. Daniel guided the ship toward one of the larger docking platforms. The landing was rough. The ship's stabilizers were still damaged, but he managed to bring it down in one piece. As the engines powered down, he took a deep breath. The moment he stepped off the ramp, he felt the eyes on him. Draven's Hollow was the kind of place where people noticed new arrivals, especially ones who showed up in a stolen Vericon ship. He pulled up the hood of his jacket, trying to blend in as he made his way through the station's winding corridors. The air smelled of rust and oil, the scent of old machines and unwashed bodies mixing together in a way that made his stomach turn. Neon signs flickered above shadowy bars and shops, advertising everything from illegal weapons to cybernetic enhancements. Conversations murmured in a dozen alien languages, deals being made in dark corners. Daniel kept moving. He needed a mechanic, someone who could repair the ship without asking questions. He spotted a small workshop at the edge of the docking bay. The sign above it half burned out. Mara's Repairs. It was as good a place as any. He stepped inside, the scent of scorched metal hitting him instantly. The workshop was cluttered, parts and tools scattered across every surface. At the back, a woman was hunched over a disassembled engine, sparks flying as she worked. She glanced up at him, wiping sweat from her forehead. She was human, which was rare out here. Short, dark hair, grease-stained hands, sharp eyes that measured him instantly. If you're here to rob me, she said, you'll leave with fewer limbs than you came in with. Daniel held up his hands. Just looking for repairs. She narrowed her eyes, glancing past him at the ship outside. That's a Vericon Hunter-class frigate. Where'd you steal it? Daniel hesitated. Let's just say it wasn't a friendly exchange. Mara snorted. Yeah, well, that thing's gonna get you killed. Half the bounty hunters in the sector are probably already looking for you. Daniel exhaled. I know. That's why I need to get it fixed. Fast. Mara studied him for a moment. Then she nodded toward the back. I'll see what I can do, but it's gonna cost you. Daniel pulled out a small pouch and tossed it onto the table. Inside were a handful of valuable credits and alien relics he had scavenged over the years. Mara peeked inside, then nodded in approval. All right, she said. Give me a few hours. Daniel nodded and turned to leave, But before he could step outside, a low voice rumbled behind him. "You're being watched." He froze. Slowly, he turned back to Mara. "What?" She jerked her chin toward the window. "There's a guy out there. Been watching you since you landed. Big. Looks military." Daniel's stomach tightened. He resisted the urge to turn and look. "Friend of yours?" Mara scoffed. "I don't have friends, but if he's watching you, it means trouble." Daniel exhaled slowly. Of course, it had only been a few hours, and they had already found him. He needed to move. But then, before he could react, the doors to the workshop burst open. A massive figure stepped inside, blocking the exit. He was tall, easily 7 feet, his body covered in advanced combat armor. His face was hidden behind a helmet, but Daniel could feel the intensity of his gaze. The man didn't speak. He just stared at Daniel. Then, finally, he said one word. "You are not supposed to exist." The armor on Daniel's body pulsed. The whisper returned. "Run." The moment the armored figure spoke, a cold dread settled in Daniel's chest. He had seen killers before, bounty hunters, warlords, but this was different. This man wasn't just another thug looking for a payday. There was something deliberate about him, something precise. Daniel could feel the weight of his presence, like a predator studying its prey. Mara stiffened beside him, her fingers twitching toward a wrench on her workbench. Her voice was low, cautious. "You know this guy?" Daniel didn't answer. His mind was racing. The man took a slow step forward, his armored boots clanking against the metal floor. The visor on his helmet glowed with a faint red hue. "The armor was never meant for you," he said, his voice distorted through the helmet speakers. "Give it up. Now." Daniel's muscles tensed. The armor on his skin reacted, shifting slightly, its dark surface rippling like liquid metal. It could sense the danger as much as he could. Mara, sensing the rising tension, took a careful step back. "Look, big guy," she said. "If you're gonna start a fight, take it outside. I just fixed half the junk in here, and I don't feel like cleaning up blood today." The man ignored her. His gaze remained locked on Daniel. "You don't understand what you're carrying," he said. "If you keep it, you will be hunted until there is nowhere left to run." Daniel swallowed hard. "Who sent you?" A pause. Then, "No one." That threw him off. He had expected a name, some warlord or secret organization that wanted the armor. But this guy wasn't a bounty hunter. He was something else. The man took another step forward. "Last chance. Surrender the armor." The armor's voice whispered in Daniel's mind. "Fight or die." His instincts screamed at him to run, but something inside him refused. He clenched his fists, feeling the armor's power surging through his limbs. He wasn't the same scavenger who had stumbled into that ruin days ago. He wasn't weak anymore. "I think I'll keep it," he said. The moment the words left his mouth, the man moved. It was impossibly fast. 1 second, he was standing still. The next, he was lunging forward, a shock baton crackling to life in his hand. Daniel barely had time to react. The armor took over. His body jerked to the side just as the baton swung past his head, missing by inches. Before he could think, his fist shot forward, striking the man's chest plate. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, knocking over tools and supplies. The man barely staggered. Daniel's stomach dropped. That punch should have sent a normal man flying. But this guy, he had enhancements, armor, something that made him stronger. Mara cursed and dove for cover as the man retaliated. He spun, bringing his baton around in a brutal arc. Daniel raised his arm to block. The impact sent a jolt of electricity through his body. Pain exploded through his nerves, and he stumbled back. The armor absorbed most of the hit, but it still hurt like hell. The man pressed forward, relentless. He swung again, this time aiming for Daniel's ribs. Daniel ducked, rolling to the side. His instincts were sharper, faster than they had ever been, But the assassin was still ahead of him. Daniel needed an opening. He reached deep into the armor, willing it to respond. He didn't know how it worked, only that it did. And in that moment, he felt it shift. A blade extended from his forearm, sleek and sharp. The sight of it surprised even him. The assassin hesitated for half a second. That was all Daniel needed. He lunged. The blade slashed across the man's chest plate, sparks flying as metal met metal. The assassin grunted, stepping back. Daniel pressed forward, swinging again, but this time, the man caught his wrist. For a terrifying moment, they struggled, locked in place. The assassin's strength was unreal. Slowly, he forced Daniel's arm downward, the blade twisting away. Then, suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the workshop. Mara had slammed a wrench into the back of the assassin's helmet. The man staggered forward, momentarily dazed. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Daniel twisted free and drove his knee into the man's stomach. The assassin grunted, stumbling back. He reached for something on his belt, a weapon, maybe, but Daniel didn't give him the chance. With every ounce of strength he had, he slammed his fist into the man's helmet. The force sent the assassin crashing into a pile of scrap. Metal and wires tumbled around him as he hit the ground hard. For a moment, silence filled the room. Daniel panted, his chest heaving. The blade retracted into his arm. Mara stared at him. "Holy shit," she muttered. "Remind me never to piss you off." Daniel didn't respond. His gaze was locked on the unmoving form of the assassin. Then, slowly, the man stirred. Daniel tensed. He expected him to attack again. But instead, the assassin simply sat up. He turned his head toward Daniel. His visor cracked, exposing a glimpse of his face. A scared jaw, cold, calculating eyes. And then, to Daniel's horror, the man smiled. "You're stronger than I thought," he said, his voice eerily calm. "That will make this interesting." Daniel's blood ran cold. The assassin tapped something on his wrist. A small beep echoed through the workshop. Then, without another word, he vanished. 1 second, he was there. The next, he was gone. A flicker of light, a shimmer in the air, and he disappeared completely. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears, a cloaking device. Mara swore under her breath. "Well, that's not good." Daniel exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. "We need to get off this station." Mara shot him a skeptical look. "We? You just hit an assassin in the head with a wrench," Daniel said. "Pretty sure that means you're involved now." Mara groaned. "Fine. But if we're leaving, we better do it now." Daniel nodded. He turned back toward the ship, but as he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that the assassin was still watching. Still waiting. The fight was over, but the hunt had only just begun. The ship tore through space at near-light speed, the stars stretching into long lines outside the cockpit. Daniel's grip tightened on the controls, his heart hammering in his chest. They weren't just running anymore. They were being hunted. Mara sat beside him, her fingers flying across the ship's console. "Engines are running hot," she muttered. "We keep this up, we'll burn out before we even make it to the next system." "We don't have a choice," Daniel said. Behind them, an entire fleet was in pursuit. The assassin had vanished after their fight on Draven's Hollow, but he hadn't given up. Within hours, bounty postings had flooded the network. Daniel's face was everywhere. Every mercenary, pirate, and warlord in the sector now knew there was something valuable about him. Something worth killing for. The worst part, the assassin wasn't just some rogue agent. He was part of something bigger, something that had been watching for a long time. And now, they were coming. The ship shuddered as an alarm blared. Mara cursed. "We've got incoming. 5 ships just dropped out of warp behind us." Daniel glanced at the scanners. The ships were sleek, black and fast. No markings, no insignia. "They're not bounty hunters," he muttered. "These guys are professionals." Mara's expression darkened. You think it's him? Daniel didn't have to answer. He knew. The assassin hadn't failed. He had been testing him. And now that he knew what the armor could do, he had called in reinforcements. Mara's fingers danced across the console. I can try to lose them in the asteroid field ahead, but it's gonna be tight. Daniel clenched his jaw. Do it. The ship veered sharply, diving toward the rocky expanse ahead. Massive asteroids drifted through the void, some spinning lazily, others colliding in violent bursts of debris. It was a death trap, but it was their only chance. Behind them, the enemy ships closed in. Laser fire erupted, streaking past their hull. The ship rocked as a blast grazed their left wing, sending sparks through the cockpit. Shields at 20%. Mara shouted. Daniel gritted his teeth. He could feel the armor pulsing, reacting to the danger. It wanted to fight. It wanted to win. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. He twisted the controls, weaving the ship between the asteroids. Chunks of rock the size of cities drifted past, their surfaces scarred from centuries of collisions. Mara gripped the edges of her seat, cursing under her breath as they barely squeezed through a narrow gap. But the enemy pilots were just as skilled. They followed without hesitation, matching every move. Daniel's pulse pounded. They're not going to stop. Mara glanced at him. Then what do we do? Daniel exhaled slowly. The armor whispered to him, offering solutions, calculations, predictions, possibilities. And then he knew. Hold on, he said. Before Mara could question him, he yanked the controls hard. The ship stalled, flipping backward in a stomach-churning maneuver. The pursuing ships shot past them, their pilots caught off guard. That was all Daniel needed. He reached deep into the armor, letting it connect. The ship's systems flickered, and then something impossible happened. The armor merged with the ship. The controls became an extension of his own body. He could feel the engines humming, the weapons primed, the targeting systems locking on. It was like the ship was alive. Before the enemy pilots could react, Daniel fired. Twin blasts of plasma erupted from the ship's cannons, striking the closest pursuer. The enemy ship exploded in a bright, fiery burst. The others tried to break formation, but Daniel was faster. He twisted the ship into an impossible dive, firing as he went. Another ship went up in flames. The remaining three scattered, their pilots finally realizing they weren't just chasing a man in a stolen suit. They were chasing something more. Mara's eyes widened. What the hell just happened? Daniel didn't answer. He could feel the armor reaching out, its presence growing stronger. It wasn't just protecting him. It was adapting. And for the first time, he realized what that meant. The armor didn't just choose him. It was evolving with him. The last enemy ship spun away, retreating toward the darkness. The battle was over. For now. Daniel exhaled, his muscles aching from the tension. The armor slowly receded, disconnecting from the ship's systems. His hand shook as he released the controls. Mara just stared at him. That wasn't normal. No, Daniel said quietly. It wasn't. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Okay, so let me get this straight. The armor bonded with you. It rejected every alien species in the galaxy, but it chose a human. And now, it's merging with technology. Daniel swallowed hard. Yeah. Mara let out a breath. We're so screwed. He almost laughed. Then, the ship's sensors beeped. Daniel glanced at the screen, and his stomach dropped. Something huge was coming. Not just a few ships. Not a bounty hunter fleet. An armada. Mara paled. Tell me that's a glitch. Daniel stared at the readings, his fingers tightening into fists. It wasn't a glitch. They had run. They had fought. They had survived. But now, the real war was about to begin. And Daniel wasn't sure if even the armor could save him this time.